This is Greg Bafidis, founder and chairman of the Posse List, and I'm here at the Georgetown University Law Center for the conference Law Firm Evolution, Brave New World, or is it business as usual? This afternoon, my guest is Laurel Terry, who was a law professor at Penn State Dickinson Law School, and her expertise is in global lawyer regulation. Laurel, thank you for joining us. This morning at the conference, Paul Smith made a rather interesting comment. I thought you might want to tell us a little more about that.
Yeah. No, I found it very interesting. He was referring to the Eversheds surveys that they'd done, both the one issued on Friday and the one issued 2 years ago. And he said in the one 2 years ago, with respect to the 2007 UK Legal Services Act, virtually no one thought it would be relevant. In the survey they just issued on Friday, everybody thought it would be relevant.
Complete turn.
Yeah, and you know what this illustrates to me is the importance of global lawyer regulation and the fact that the legal profession has often been a little slow to realize that at the outset. But I think Bruce McEwen was right today when he said you can't expect these developments to just stop at the ocean. Things that happen elsewhere in the world are going to have an impact here, and we're going to have to be prepared to deal with them, if nothing else, because it changes the conditions of competition for those elsewhere.
Can you tell us a little bit about this, because I think you're more of an expert certainly than I am, about the Bologna process, what that is and what that involves?
Yeah, the Bologna process has had a dramatic impact on legal education in Europe, and is starting to have one elsewhere in the world as well. It's a little over 10 years old. It's grown from 4 countries to 46 countries
What is it actually?
within that process, time period, and it's designed to reshape higher education in Europe, both EU and non-EU countries, to make them more competitive in a knowledge information-based society and more responsive to employers. It's quite ambitious. It has 10 different action lines, and a tremendous amount has been done with respect to that. And it's had influences, for example, in the US. There's one of the spin-off projects is called Tuning, which is trying to develop curriculum and outcomes. And so there's a legal arm of that that's busy working. So clearly if 46 countries agree what tax lawyers need to know, then
wow,
everybody else is going to need those competencies as well. And there's some pilot projects in the US that are doing something similar based on that.
Do you think the U.S. then, legal education, we're kind of maybe a step behind on what's required globally? Or do you think we're maybe too insular?
I think that it depends on the particular issue that we're talking about. I think with respect to global legal education, yes. I think there's a tremendous amount of initiative and thought being generated, and while there are certainly segments within higher education in the U.S. that are following it, for example, I don't think it's particularly well known in U.S. law schools.
Your site, you have your own site, which seems to be chock-a-block with content. Can you tell us some of the stuff that's on there?
Yeah. One of the things that I have, if you go to my law school webpage, it links to my personal webpage, and I have posted on my personal webpage all the PDFs of all the articles that I've written. But even more useful, I think, is I have a presentations webpage where I put up the PowerPoint slides whenever I give a talk. And so I do a lot of overview discussions about different kinds of global regulatory trends, and so it's a quick and easy way to get an introduction. I also have an overview talk there that tells you about some of the 9 different trends that I see going on right now that I think lawyers should be paying attention to, consulting on, pressing their governments more about.
You've written about EU competition policy and legal services, which one would think don't necessarily go hand in hand, or why are they related? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is actually a trend that you see worldwide. The EU identified 5 different professions, professional services, and looked at 5 different issues with respect to those. And so it was things that's pretty familiar to US audiences, fees and advertising, but also this topic of alternative business structures, which includes MDPs and potentially publicly traded law firms, monopoly requirements, entry to the profession. And so, you know, they have a great little soundbite, which is they generated a chart that has point values for all the countries, all the professions on these issues, and sent countries out to go look at their own regulations and see if they should be revised. And it's had a big impact. Canada had something similar. Australia has similar antitrust initiatives. The OECD has issued a report on competitive restrictions in the legal profession. So this is something that governments are talking to about each other. Lawyers often are not paying much attention. Regulators aren't, but it really has tremendous potential to change the rules of the game. Sometimes for the better, but not necessarily. So that's part of why I think the legal profession needs to be more involved in monitoring these developments.
One of the topics that keeps being mentioned again and again at these seminars is the fact of how private equity has moved into the investment of law firms. Obviously in the UK, now in Europe proper, the continent, and Canada. You think we'll ever see equity firms, law firms treated as corporations in effect, or as an investment vehicle?
Yeah, I think it's quite likely. Let me just correct. I think Australia has it. They have publicly traded firms, and the UK has announced they're going to have it in 2011.
Okay, that's
and
the
new
new act, right?
Yeah, right. The other countries, that's not quite so sure. They're talking about related developments. Yeah, I think it's very hard to stop the market. So I think that if it happens in the UK in particular, with the number of firms with offices in London and in New York, there's going to be a lot of competitive pressures. So the Legal Services Board and Solicitors Regulation Authority have been quite good about putting out consultations, saying here's what we're thinking, here's the direction. And I think US firms and lawyers should be reading that and looking at those carefully, because the conditions that are set in the UK, it seems to me quite likely they're going to end up traveling, the pond,
across the pond, right.
And they're going to be what we're living with. So we have an incentive to make sure they get it right at the beginning.
Okay, we're going to be doing some follow-up on many of these issues, especially the ones involving global lawyer regulation. We hope we have a chance to talk to you again and get some more input from you.
Yeah, be happy to do it.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.